All right, welcome everybody to the penultimate week of Computer Science 1. And hope you all have had fun with the Python assignment. If you have any questions about it, let me know. Today we're going to be talking about consciousness, and specifically, since this is a computer science class, from the perspective of if computers can be conscious. And this obviously has a number of important implications, right? Like, how many people here have played Halo? And if you have, you probably know where I'm going with this. A couple people. Do you know where I'm going with this? If computers can be conscious? AI taking over? Halo 4? Never played Halo? Okay, well, maybe you've heard of Cortana, which is part of every version of Windows now. It was originally a fictional character from a video game, and then Microsoft decided, you know what would be neat if we just made an AI assistant, because that's what Cortana is. It's like a digital robot assistant AI kind of thing. Why don't we make her real? You know? In reality, obviously, it doesn't. It's not fully intelligent and stuff like that. But the every version of Windows recently has had Cortana as part of it, and Cortana listens on your microphone. You can wake up Cortana by issuing a keyword, and then you can ask it questions like, how many people, Cortana, how many people live on, the moon or something like that, 0. Good. So it sort of replaced Microsoft Search, but basically, yeah, you can add. It's like Alexa. Amazon has Alexa. Microsoft has Cortana. Apple has Siri. Samsung has Bixby, but I think they're replacing Bixby with Sam. I don't know if you guys have heard about this. Usually the first thing I do when I get a new cell phone or computer is I disable all of the AI assistants. But they've been out there for a while. Has anyone here used Google, OK Google, or whatever? What is it? You guys know what I'm talking about? The series is really bad. Cortana 1. One person lives on the moon. That's fine. You guys know what I'm talking about with like the Google Voices? I think it's like OK Google, right? Is the phrase. Again, due to privacy concerns, I actually don't use any of those. You use Google Assistants. What sort of questions do you ask them? How old is Sarah Jessica Parker? Add a reminder. Set of reminders. Yeah. That's the one that I usually see people do. Set a reminder for 5 p.m. tomorrow to do something or other. Maps. Who won sports games? Flight. I didn't know you could do flight status. That's cool. I don't use it, but it's kind of cool, kind of useful. Hey, has the flight landed? That's cool. As far as music goes, Play Me Some Music was actually written by a friend of mine. It's kind of cool. I don't know if it was just him, but you just ask Google to play you some music. It's kind of cool. It comes with some music it thinks you like, based on your preferences and things like that. So anyhow, so Cortana and all of these other things are sort of AI assistants, and so it's a interesting question to think about. Like, are they conscious? Because that seems to have a pretty important. It makes a difference, right? Like if it's more than just a program, and a program like we talked about last time is just a bunch of symbol processing machines. Like not last time, 2 times ago. when we're talking about symbols and semiotics. A computer at its heart reads a symbol, does some if-then statements on it, and then reads another symbol. And that's basically all a computer does. And Searle, in his Chinese room argument, says, well, that makes it, not conscious, right? There's no inner life, because humans have a concept of meaning. If I say the word cow to you, you probably can envision a cow in your head, right? We use symbols to transmit information to other people, but we fundamentally work with semantics, with semantic content. And a computer never does that. A computer is simply a symbol processing machine. But, if a AI was conscious, then all of a sudden you have to start asking yourself, like, is it murder to turn off your Windows machine, right? So, let's get into what consciousness is. So consciousness is not awareness of the world around you. It's not being awake. It's sort of a word with multiple meanings. And when I say it's not in those things, it's like, not for today, right? Some people use the word, I'm conscious right now, meaning, I haven't been knocked out or whatever, right? That's not really what we're talking about today. What we're talking about today is the definition of consciousness from philosophy, really, and that's subjective experience. What the hell is subjective experience? It's a great question, If you know what it is, tell me. Get a Nobel Prize or something, I don't know. But, in all seriousness, we do kind of know what subjective experience is, even if we don't know, like, how to explain it, really, in any sort of way. Like, if you take your arm and you pinch it, right, you feel pain. And that can't be observed, right? That's why it's called subjective experience. If you put somebody in a fMRI, a brain scanner kind of thing, and you pinch their wrist, you'll see a bunch of neurons, the C bundle, neuron fiber, or whatever, part of the brain, lighting up. And so a scientist could be like, oh, well, that person's feeling pain. But they don't actually see pain. They see what are called the neural correlates of consciousness. They see, hey, we know that when this neuron lights up, they experience the smell of chocolate. And when this neuron lights up, they experience the smell of cranberries. And when this neuron lights up, they experience the smell of old books, right? And it's completely unclear how it is that one neuron lighting up causes that experience of cranberry smell versus chocolate smell versus old book smell. Like, how the hell does that even happen? I have no idea, right? And we can't observe it, right? Like, we can't actually tell what a person smells when they smell chocolate, right? When somebody sees a color, we can see different neurons light up and be like, all right, they're seeing red right now, they're seeing blue right now, because we know what the correlates are, but we could be wrong. Like, somebody might experience blue when they're seeing red and vice versa, and you really don't know. All you know is that a neuron that is usually correlated with red is lighting up. Maybe for that person, they don't see red. Maybe that person sees blue. You have absolutely no way of telling. And this is something that drives neuroscientists crazy. If they think about it, so they usually don't. And I feel it, man. Good. If I don't stretch your brain at least once a week, then I'm doing my job. All right, I'm not doing my job. All these words make my neurons fire. Do you guys know what I'm talking about, though? Like, all the neurons are basically, just carrying voltages, right? Like, that's all that's happening when a neuron fires. A bunch of neurotransmitters come out. They basically carry an electrical voltage, potential from one neuron to another. And so how the hell can it be that all these neurons, which, they look a little bit different, but they're all essentially the same thing. How is it that one neuron can result in, you smelling a wet dog? Like, you can think about it too, right? Like, if you think about Like if you've ever been to a hot springs or something like that, and you think about it, you can remember that rotten egg smell. You can almost smell it, right? Like right now, even though there's no rotten eggs around. So how the hell is it that this neuron activating, which looks like all the other neurons activating, it's just a voltage, how can it result in the subjective experience of rotten eggs, whereas, another one, you smell the ocean and that salty tang on the air, and, smell of, sand, heating in the sun and things like that, Kind of a mystery, right? So, so we don't actually know. We actually don't know how that is, right? But it seems important to us, and we all know that we experience it, right? Like, there's a few people that think that it's all, just an illusion, but by and large, like, we all kind of agree. Like, look, I'm feeling pain right now. Oh, look, I'm smelling. Actually, the smell of the coffee is more chocolate. It's a chocolate vanilla cinnamon latte. So that actually smelled more like chocolate than coffee. I was going to go with coffee, but it smelled like chocolate. Yep. So, it's really hard to talk about because it's one of those things where, like, in science, we can usually agree on objective reality, right? Like, you hand a bunch of people this remote control here, and they can weigh it, and one person says it weighs 5 grams, another person says it weighs 4.99 grams, and, maybe you reweigh it and stuff like that. But in general, like, when you have something that is objective, objective means that different observers can observe the same thing, and you can pass it around, and everybody's like, yep, it's black, and count how many buttons are on it, and stuff like that. With subjective experience, who the hell knows? Because you can't actually tell, right? It's actually quite possible that somebody experiences the color spectrum backwards from how you do, right? So rather than Roy G. Biv, it is Viv Roy. I don't know. If you've never had that experience, well, the neuron activate at all. Like if I ask you to, it's a good question, right? Like if I ask you to think about the sensation of skiing, right, and you've never skied, it's like, I don't know, you could probably use your imagination. Like I'm going downhill at a high speed. I don't know. Maybe. And some people have aphantasia, which I've met 2 people with aphantasia. And aphantasia people can't imagine things, right? Like if I ask you to imagine in your head, a picture of Washington, D.C., right? People with aphantasia can't do that. So, which is an interesting question as well, actually, from the question of consciousness. So, the first and probably most famous theory is dualism, and the most famous proponent of dualism is Rene Descartes. Now, you might think that just because he's the most famous, he's right, but that would be putting Descartes before the horse. Okay, so so according to Descartes, what makes matter matter? I'm getting one probably angry response on chat right now from students. So what makes matter matter is that it has extension. In other words, you can measure it. It's got a length, a width, a height, a weight, that kind of stuff. And his whole point is that Rentry, did you delete it? It's fine. It's fine. I fully admit it was a bad joke. So, but his point was like, how much does a thought weigh, right? How much does the notion that liberty is a good thing weigh? What's its length? What's its height? That, like, it just sort of objectively. The topic went too fast, so you deleted it. How many foots does I like listening to Taylor Swift have? It doesn't even make sense, right? And when things have different properties, they're different, right? And so there's different kinds of dualism. There's property dualism, there's substance dualism, but ultimately they boil down to the fact that your mind and physical objects are different somehow. And if you can't say how long a belief in democracy is, then it's not the same sort of thing as a physical object. Huh? So, any free thoughts? Foots, because America. Yeah, my daughter's learning imperial units right now, and so she was highly amused by. There is a unit of measurement called a butt. So there is 108 imperial gallons or 130 U.S. gallons in a butt. So there you go. Good humor right there. Good humor. Royale with cheese, yeah. Whereas the quarter pounder with cheese, or the 353 grams with cheese. I don't know. Okay. So, right. So you can measure things, you can weigh things, and thoughts, like we've seen, seem to you can't even observe in any way somebody's smell of chocolate, or what color they experience when they see a color, right? And so that's a pretty good argument for it being different, right? And so the problem is how mind and matter interact, right? Descartes thought that the interaction took place in the pineal gland for some reason. I think the pineal gland inside of the brain had just been discovered, and it looked like a little person or something. I don't know. I don't think anyone takes that seriously today. But Descartes was like, all right, that's the spot where, you have a little person inside of your brain, and that's the person that controls your brain or something like that. But no. So, matter is measurable and thoughts are not. Yeah, it's observable and thoughts are not. Right? Like we can observe voltages, in the brain, but we can't tell if the person's actually experiencing anything like what we think they're experiencing. We could be wrong. And if they told us, like let's say you do transcranial stimulation, and you activate part of their brain, and that part of the brain is normally associated with memories of childhood, and the person says, nope, I'm instead remembering my first guitar lesson when I was 20 years old. Scientists have no way of telling if you're lying or not, right? Like, they know that area is commonly associated with memories of childhood or whatever, But the person's like, no, my subjective experience is different. They could be lying to you, and you'd have no idea if they're lying to you or not, because there's no way of actually observing what they're experiencing, right? All you can do is say, well, this neuron, which is typically associated with this thing, is activating right now. So that's the primary argument for dualism, is that, thought and matter are different. Matter is observable and measurable and all that stuff, and thoughts just don't seem to be. So, the problem with it is the interaction problem, right? Like, how does mind control matter? How does matter influence mind? Obviously, if you do psychedelic drugs, then your mental experience changes, right? And so clearly the material world affects, and if you do transcranial stimulation, like, it'll stimulate the smell of chocolate or whatever in your subjective experience. So clearly there's an interaction there. But how? How the hell does that happen? Right? It's a good question, and it's a a lot of people think it's a lethal question for dualism, right? Because it seems impossible, but at the same time, mind seems impossible. So, what's more impossible? I don't know. You're spitting blood. Let's go. Okay, so monism is the opposite of dualism, and basically, it's just everything that exists is one thing. But what that one thing is kind of hard to pin down, right? Because if you say that everything is matter, then how the hell does thought occur? Like, how do you have subjective experience that can't be observed if everything is just matter? Like, everything's like rocks and electricity and stuff, right? Like, how do you actually have a mind arise in a physical universe? In fact, that's the name of a book that I have around here somewhere, which is something along the lines of, like, how does mind arise in a physical universe? And there's all these essays on it from different people that are speculating. They're all physicalists, which is a form of monism. Everything's matter. everything's physical. And they're like, it's an emergent property. Okay, well, how does the emergent property, work? How do you suddenly get subjective experience? Like imagine you have a bunch of rocks, and you like kind of move them around a little bit. Is there some form of like putting the rocks around that they become self-aware suddenly? Like it doesn't, but it's very complicated rock pattern. Okay, well, how does like there's nothing in a rock that seems like it could be capable of supporting, thought. You just move them around and just you hit a random pattern one day and now it's self-aware. Like it doesn't seem possible, right? So water has memory. Yeah, what was that homeopathy or whatever? Water contains the memory of the snake venom or whatever that was in it. So another approach is idealism. In fact, do I have idealism on here? I do. Okay. Yeah. So materialism or physicalism is everything's matter. Idealism is everything's mind. Everything's something. And so there's different kinds of monism. All right. And so the most common one is materialism. All right. And if you deal with atheists, scientists, like it's probably going to be their go-to philosophy when it comes to consciousness. Like just everything's material. There's no such thing as mind, essentially. There's no separate material called mind. Let's put it that way. And that's sort of like how science operates, in part because science can't observe mind, right? And so for a lot of people who do science, like if you can't observe something, it doesn't exist, right? But there's a trouble with that, which is that we can all observe that it exists, right, individually. And so there's this sort of like irreconcilable conflict at the heart of science, which is that the fact that we're conscious is the most observed observation in the history of mankind. Everybody who's conscious, put your hand up, right? And the whole, crowd will put their hand up, except for those that are just messing with you, right? So it's observed by everyone. It's 100% of observation, right? So, I don't know, maybe people in a coma or something, right? So it's the strongest observation possible, but science has to say, for all intents and purposes, it doesn't exist, right? Which is a contradiction at the heart of science, because science says the stronger the observational evidence for something, the more we should believe in it, the more confident we are that it exists. But the most observed thing in all of humanity, consciousness, doesn't exist, or for all intents and purposes doesn't exist. And so if you I don't know who Vsauce is, sorry. It's always interesting to me when people link different streamers and things like that, because it's like, yeah, I watch abroad in Japan, mostly because I'm studying Japanese, also because the dude's funny. Tokini Andy is a Japanese blogger, also because I'm learning the Japanese language. Max Miller's Tasting History, which is history and food. It's pretty fun. And that's it. Those are the only 3 streamers that I actually watch these days. So, you like abroad in Japan? Yeah. Oh, Kearney is secretly Vsauce. Right. So, yeah, I hope that's a compliment at least. Let's see who Vsauce is. This guy? Do triangles have 4 sides? Future reasoning. How many holes does a human have? Lord, I don't want to click on that in class. Okay, so no, like I literally I basically don't watch television. I haven't had television in 20 years, and I don't watch YouTube streaming very much. I told you those are the 3 streamers that I actually watch. I basically don't watch anyone else. Okay. So the attitude you have to take if you're a materialist is, okay, sure, there are these things that we know exist: mind, thought, qualia, which is subjective experience, basically. But I'm hopeful we will one day discover it all, right? We don't have it yet, but science is never complete, so I'm hopeful that this thing that appears to be something different isn't. You know. And the irony of that is that usually the like atheist stem materialist philosophy is very much based on science, right? Where science says you should base your opinions on fact, and proportion your belief to the evidence and things like that. And they're like, there's this thing that exists that we've studied, we can't figure out how it is, and haven't really made any progress on it, but we're hopeful that one day it will turn out to be wrong. Just hope, right? Because we figured out how fire worked, we figured out how lightning worked, we figured out how earthquakes work. Those were all physical, so this thing that doesn't share the same properties as any of that stuff, we're hoping will be physical somehow. And I'm going to base my worldview on hope. And so it's quite ironic. What is the speed of darkness? Okay. All science has ever found evidence for is matter. Yeah, and so there's a bit of circular reasoning going on there, right? Because science only deals with the observable, right? And so if you can't observe something, science can't deal with it, right? Like there could be an invisible tiger in this room right now that doesn't interact with any particles, and I have no way of knowing about it. You can't really say it doesn't exist. At best you can say it's as if it doesn't exist because it doesn't interact with anything, right? But science is a tool for discovering the laws of nature, essentially, and in matter, right? Matter matters, and it can't discover anything else, and so the fact that it can't discover anything else is used as conclusive evidence that nothing else exists, which is a bit of circular reason. It's like you take a trip to the top of Mount Everest and observe everything on the top of Mount Everest. You don't see any fish, and you're like, okay, well, fish don't exist, right? And people are like, well, we know that fish exists because everyone can see it from the top of the. Well, yeah, but we can't go underwater, and all we can do is look at the tops of mountaintops and conclude from that fish does exist, and it's just a very odd stance to take. Okay, so Panpsychism is a view that mind is somehow a property of matter. Okay, and this is a little bit more, I think, reasonable than materialism. Materialism is very popular, and it might very well be right, but as of right now, it sort of has an irredeemable weakness, which is that it can't deal with the fact that mind has different properties than matter, right? And dualism, for its part, has a trouble that doesn't seem possible to interact. And so panpsychism tries to resolve that by just saying everything is one thing, and that one thing is mind matter, right? And so the more complicated a information processing system is, the more self-aware it is, right? So a thermostat, which processes just a few bits at a time, is a little bit conscious, but not enough that we care about. And then an ant is a little more conscious, and a cat's more conscious, and a human's more, and so on and so forth. And so your CPU might actually have some bit of consciousness, some subjective experience. There might be something like being a CPU. Like, what is it like to be a CPU, right? That under panpsychism, that's a question you can ask. What is it like to be a CPU? Normally, we restrict that to just like animals and stuff, right? What's it like to be a bat? It's Thomas Nagel's famous paper in the 70s. Having extra RGB would invoke faster thinking. That's exactly right. So here's my. See it? There we go. There's my full multicolor RGB keyboard, which I can program to do all sorts of fancy effects on. Normally, though, I just have it set to the color of my wallpaper engine. And so, did I lose that? So the keyboard changes colors. But yeah. Like, so yeah, for example, each RGB, light you have might have just a small little drop of, consciousness in it, right? And the more complex the system is, the more conscious it grows. And so the trouble with this is like, okay, so is the internet conscious? Maybe being kind to your Intel CPU will allow to be. Yeah, that's why people yell at their computers, right? You stupid thing! How could you delete my homework, right? See, we all think it's conscious, right? Now the trouble with panpsychism is like, all right, well, the internet is a very complicated, information processing thing. Is the internet self-aware? It certainly doesn't seem to have any control over itself, right? Like if I turn on a firewall setting here, like, it's not like the internet's doing that, right? It's fully determined by humans that feed into it, and how exactly does that even work for, how does it know which information is connected to which other information? Like it seems like a very odd notion. In fact, a lot of people mock panpsychism as being like the Deepak Chopra kind of like a, pseudoscience, like, yeah, everything is aware, man, kind of thing. But at the same time, like, they don't have a better solution. So I don't know what to tell you. Now, David Chalmers is a guy who proposed the notion of what's called a philosophical zombie, or a p-zombie, which is a person that could be my exact clone, right? If you duplicated every atom of me, and had a second Kearney sitting right here, that clone could be, to the scientist's view, completely atom for atom the same, but it is possible that that clone is not conscious at all. It doesn't have any inner life. It doesn't have any subjective experience. You could poke it and it would go, ow, and you could feed it chocolate and be like, that's chocolate. But all it's doing is giving the external appearance of being conscious, but on the inside it's completely hollow. And Chalmers' point is, as long as that's the case, we can't really believe materialism, because if materialism was true, then having a complete material description of something would be enough to be like, yeah, that's conscious. And currently, you can't. Even if you know every neuron in a person's body, you can't, in their brain, you can't tell if they're conscious or not. And so, yeah, so panpsychism, maybe the universe itself is conscious. Maybe there's this universal fabric of thought, that underlies the universe. Does the universe have a soul? And, it seems like a pretty wild, out there idea, but, at least it doesn't have the trouble that materialism has, So I guess it's got that going for it. Is it God? Yeah, I mean, it corresponds to the Hindu concept of Brahman, right? Like the Brahman is sort of the ultimate reality, and individual humans are like fingers reaching up from that reality. They appear to be different, and they talk to each other and fight each other and things like that. But ultimately, under the surface, they're all just fingers on the same hand, right? They're all just different manifestations of the universal truth. And so, yeah, and so panpsychism has some pretty important consequences from that belief, if you're into it. So, yeah, read David Chalmers if you're into that kind of stuff. All right, so idealism, physics plus spiritualism, right. And so it's not attractive to physicists, and it's not attractive to religious people unless you're already predisposed, I think, to like Hinduism, similar religions. So idealism is the notion that everything's mind. Like it resolves the problem of some things are physical, some things are mind, by just saying everything's actually mind. And you can make a pretty good argument for this too. In fact, you can make a pretty good argument for all four of the major stances on consciousness, and that's one of the reasons why it's been such a tough debate that's not been resolved for 400 years, because all of them seem to have pretty good arguments, and all of them also seem to have fatal flaws, right? So idealism is the notion that everything is mind. And so the argument you can make for idealism is that prior to anything else, like, if I reach out in the world and pluck the guitar there, and listen to music, prior to all of that happening, the first thing that I start with is the fact that I'm a mind in a world, right? Everything that I see and touch and smell and taste gets into my mind, right? And my mind controls all the decisions that go into the world. It's causally prior to everything else, right? Before I interact with the world, I decide in my mind to interact with it. And before I can experience something, my mind processes the input and generates these mental events that I'm hearing a guitar being plucked or whatever. And so the only thing that we can be sure of is that mind exists, right? And if it's and if you want to be a monist, if you want to say, hey, only one thing exists because it's simpler that way, like, why is there two things, right? Why is there not three? Why is there not 10 different kinds of things, right? If you want to just say everything is one thing, well, we know mind exists because we experience it, and we can't experience the world without mind, right? So then everything's mind. It's a, you don't need to appeal to like religion or, we're all in a simulation or any of this kind of stuff, which you could do. Just the fact that mind comes before everything that we do out, and it is the last thing that happens before we sense something on the way in, then mind is the most important thing, and everything else is just a consequence of it. So, yeah. So, see you, Lucian. So, yeah, so we can talk about simulationism. So, some people like Elon Musk think that we're living in a simulation. And you can make an argument for us being in a simulation based on the following, rather short argument. As humans get more advanced, we're going to build faster and faster computers, right? And eventually computers are going to get to the point that they could simulate people. And moreover, they could simulate entire universes if they get strong enough, fast enough. And so in the distant future, we might be simulating tens of trillions of people digitally in a world that only has like maybe 10 billion people in it. And so probabilistically speaking, if we're in the future right now, there's a 99% chance that we're not one of the real humans, but we're one of the simulated humans, and we just can't tell. Like, we touch things and it feels real to us, but it's actually all just generated by a computer. And when you drop something, it simulates gravity like we do in Skyrim and other video games, You drop something and it falls. In the video game, the people in the video game presumably think they're real, right? And so, the odds are, probabilistically speaking, that we're in a simulation. So, monism would be, in that case, like the one substance that makes everything up is the fabric of computer-generated reality, right? And that also resolves the generate people. Yeah, the metahuman thing in Unreal Engine is pretty amazing. It's pretty nice looking. So, so basically, to people in Skyrim, there's no dualism, materialism kind of thing. It's just everything is just bits in a computer, right? That's the one thing that exists. And information, if you want to put it that way. And so, basically, if we experience that information the way we do, as like smells and tastes and touch sensations and things like that, then it's correct to say that everything is thought, right? Everything is information. Idealism is true. So, how do you know we're not already living in a simulation? I don't know. How do the people in Skyrim escape from the simulation? They don't. How do they tell? They can't. Maybe the player does a cheat code and drops 100 cheese wheels on them or something. But like, there's kind of no easy answer to that. Now, some people say quantum mechanics is an example that we're living in a simulation, because it gives like a maximum resolution, right, to the universe, so to speak. And so it's a sign that the computers hit their limit. When you get down to the very smallest quanta, the Planck length or whatever. I don't know. To me, the universe seems awfully wasteful if you're going to be trying to save on CPU time. Like every particle in the universe basically interacts with every other particle. That's an extremely expensive way of doing things. If I had to do it, magnets would have a range of like 2 meters, right? And basically magnets wouldn't be able to interact with things beyond that point. But who knows? It's hard to leave a dimension if you don't know what the next one feels like or what it exists. Yeah. And so basically, we'd be reliant upon the person running the simulation to tell us that we're in a simulation. And if they don't, then, you know, you can guess, like you can read in Scientific American things like that, like evidence we're living in a simulation. But, you know, it's one of those things you just probably can't figure out. So that is basically the four main approaches: dualism, materialism, panpsychism, and idealism. So dualism is that there's two different types of things: physical and material. Materialism is there's one type of thing, material stuff, physical, rocks, things like that, and how thought's handled. Well, thought's material too, we just don't know how. Panpsychism is everything is made of mind matter, and rocks and things like that aren't intelligent at all. Very simple, like your wristwatch is very slightly conscious, and the more complicated and integrated the information systems are, the progressively more conscious and subjective experience-y things are. Also sounds like hippie, doing drugs, like the world's alive, man. So a lot of people don't take it seriously, but Chalmers, who's one of the prominent physicists of mind, does. Idealism is the notion that everything's mind, and you can read a philosopher named Berkeley on that. And so all the stuff that we touch, that's rocks and mice and coffee and things like that, it's actually just all mind, and our mind interacts with it as if it's physical, as if it's solid, but in reality we're all in heaven or a simulation, or just everything is mind. And because we can be sure that at least some mind exists, and philosophically speaking it makes sense for everything to be one thing instead of two, then everything is mind. Okay, so there you go. And if you make a Cortana, if you make a Bixby or Siri or any sort of intelligent agent, like there's a pretty important ethical dilemma, right? Like, can you delete Cortana, right? If panpsychism is correct, your CPU is fairly complicated. There's billions of transistors within your CPU right now. It's causing me to appear on your screen. So is it as intelligent as a dog? I don't know. Like, you don't just go out and kill dogs for fun, I hope, right? So why would you turn off your computer? Seems like murder to me. I don't know. Sleep mode. Shh, go to sleep. So yeah, it's one of those things that, like I said, in science we typically deal with it by just not thinking about it. It's too hard a question. We're just going to pretend the question doesn't exist, which is not a great look for science, to be honest. But sleep now. But I mean, what you like? It's a hard problem. Philosophers have been talking about it for centuries. No real good resolution. So, yep, science will just keep on doing its science thing, and if it turns out that it's murder, oops, I guess that's the attitude. It's the best we can do. Maybe. I don't know. Something to think about, though. So, the quiz for next time will just be being able to identify the four different types of ideas when it comes to consciousness. And you might want to write about this. Oh, I still need to put up the assignment for your end of the year essay. So that could be an interesting thing to talk about, right? Make an argument for idealism, make an argument for panpsychism, make an argument for materialism, make an argument for dualism. There's a lot of literature on the subject, and talk about how that relates to computer science or whichever field you're going into. The ethical implications of panpsychism being right, for example, is kind of wild, right? Don't turn off your monitor, you're killing it. I don't know. All right, so that's it for today, and I will see you guys next time. Peace out.